The interrogation room reeked of stale coffee and institutional disinfectant. Captain Valkyrie, Reaper, Thorne sat motionless in the metal chair, her weathered flight jacket draped over shoulders that had carried more ghosts than most soldiers twice her age. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her angular face, a face that had stared death in the eye and never blinked first. Across the scarred table, Colonel Martinez shuffled through classified files, his fingers trembling slightly as he read details that made seasoned officers lose sleep. The incident report from Kandahar province lay open between them, its pages marked with redacted sections that told stories the military preferred buried. 3 days ago, an entire Taliban compound had been reduced to ash and silence. No survivors, no witnesses. Just the smoking wreckage of what intelligence suggested was a high-value target meeting. "Captain Thorne," Martinez began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too many young pilots return in boxes, "you were the only aircraft in that sector. Satellite imagery shows a single A-10 Thunderbolt II conducting what appears to be an unauthorized strike mission." He paused, studying her impassive expression. "Your wingman, Lieutenant Casey, reported you broke formation at 3:47 hours. Radio contact was lost for 17 minutes. Thorne's gray eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond the colonel's shoulder, as if she could see through the concrete walls to the sky that had been her sanctuary and her battlefield. Her calloused hands rested flat on the table, steady as granite despite the storm brewing in the room. The silence stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the distant rumble of F-16s returning from patrol. "Colonel," she finally spoke, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned to command respect in a world that questioned her right to it. "Before we discuss what happened in that valley, I think you need to understand what brought me there." Her eyes shifted to meet his, and Martinez saw something that made his breath catch, not defiance, but the hollow emptiness of someone who'd already sacrificed everything that mattered. "Roll up your sleeve, Captain," he ordered, though his tone had shifted from interrogation to something approaching reverence. He'd heard the whispers in the halls, the rumors about pilots who carried marks that spoke of missions that never officially existed. "I need to see your service record, all of it." Thorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes as she reached for her left sleeve. The fabric pulled back slowly, revealing skin marked by more than time and training. Martinez leaned forward, and his face went ashen as the tattoo emerged from shadow into fluorescent light. The three-headed dog of Cerberus stared back at him, its eyes rendered in deep crimson ink, its fangs bared in eternal vigilance. Below it, a banner bore the words that made grown men whisper prayers: "Erebus Squadron, where ANGLS Fear 2 fly." But it was the tally marks beneath, small, precise scratches that covered her entire forearm like a roadmap of violence, that made Martinez understand he wasn't interrogating just another pilot. Lieutenant Casey burst through the door without knocking, his young face flushed with urgency. "Sir, we've got a situation. Taliban forces are massing near the Pakistani border and they're requesting immediate air support. The forward operating base is reporting heavy casualties." He paused, his eyes finding Thorne's exposed tattoo, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "They're specifically asking for Reaper." The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken history. Martinez looked from the urgent lieutenant to the woman whose sleeve revealed secrets that changed everything. Outside, the sound of jet engines spooling up echoed across the base, a mechanical symphony that spoke of urgent missions and dangerous skis. Thorne slowly rolled her sleeve back down, covering the mark that identified her as something far more dangerous than a simple A-10 pilot. "Tell me about Erebus Squadron, Captain," Martinez said quietly, his earlier authority replaced by the careful tone of a man who'd suddenly realized he was sitting across from a legend he'd thought was dead. The files in front of him suddenly felt inadequate, filled with sanitized reports that couldn't capture the reality of what Thorne represented. Thorne stood, her movements fluid despite the weight of exhaustion that seemed to press down on her shoulders. Erebus doesn't exist, Colonel. Never did. Just like the mission that brought down that compound never happened. She moved toward the window, where the Afghan sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and shadow. But if it did exist, and if I were part of it, I'd tell you that some things are worth more than following orders. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman carved from conflict, shaped by decisions that existed in the gray spaces between right and wrong. The mark on my arm isn't just a tattoo, sir. It's a promise, a covenant written in blood and sealed with the understanding that some battles can only be fought by those willing to walk through hell itself. Martinez studied her profile, nodding the way her jaw tightened when she spoke of promises, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of more than just fatigue. The Taliban compound. What made you break formation? What was worth risking your career, your freedom? Intelligence reported a high-value meeting, Thorne replied, her voice carrying the flat tone of someone reciting facts that had been burned into memory. But what they didn't tell you was that the meeting involved 3 American prisoners, soldiers captured from a convoy ambush 2 weeks ago. She turned from the window, her eyes holding depths that spoke of impossible choices. By the time official authorization came through, those men would have been dead. The weight of her words settled over the room like smoke from a distant fire. Lieutenant Casey shifted uncomfortably, his young face struggling to process the implications of what he was hearing. These were the moments that separated career soldiers from those who carried the real weight of command. The understanding that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting the consequences that followed. The prisoners, Martinez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Did you? Extract successful, Thorne confirmed, her military bearing reasserting itself. 3 American soldiers returned to friendly forces, 0 friendly casualties, mission parameters exceeded. She paused, letting the clinical language mask the human cost. The compound was eliminated to prevent future use as a detention facility. Outside, the base continued its rhythm of organized chaos, helicopters lifting off for medical evacuations, supply convoys forming up for dangerous runs through insurgent territory. And in the distance, the constant background hum of surveillance drones maintaining their eternal watch over a landscape that had swallowed empires. But inside the interrogation room, 3 people grappled with the reality that war rarely offered clean choices or simple answers. Lieutenant Casey finally found his voice. Sir, the forward operating base, they're still requesting immediate air support. Taliban forces have them surrounded, and they're running low on ammunition. His youth showed in the way he looked between the 2 senior officers, seeking guidance in a situation that military training hadn't prepared him for. Martinez closed the classified files, his decision crystallizing with the weight of command responsibility. Captain Thorne, you're grounded pending investigation into the Kandahar incident. He paused, meeting her steady gaze. However, given the urgent nature of the current situation and the specific request for your call sign, I'm temporarily lifting that restriction for this mission only. Thorne nodded once, a crisp acknowledgement that carried no surprise. She'd expected this moment, the military's willingness to use her skills even as it questioned her methods. Understood, sir. I'll need my bird fueled and armed. Time to target. 40 minutes, Casey reported, consulting his tablet. FOB Marathon is requesting immediate close air support. They've got Marines pinned down in a valley with limited escape routes. He looked up, his expression showing the first glimpse of understanding about what Reaper represented. Sir, the weather report shows incoming storms. Visibility will be minimal. Then it's a good thing storms don't scare her, Martinez muttered, remembering stories he dismissed as legend. Tales of a pilot who could fly through conditions that grounded entire squadrons, who could put ordnance on target in situations where others couldn't even find the battlefield. Captain, you have authorization for whatever means necessary to extract those Marines. Thorne was already moving toward the door, her stride carrying the purposeful energy of someone shifting from interrogation subject to combat pilot. I'll need Casey as my spotter, she said, without turning around. If he's going to be in that radio room coordinating air support, he needs to understand what Reaper actually means. The young lieutenant's eyes widened, but he nodded with the eager determination of someone who'd just been offered a chance to witness legend in action. Martinez watched them leave, his mind already composing the reports he'd have to file, reports that would somehow need to explain why he'd sent a pilot under investigation into the most dangerous airspace in the theater. As the door closed behind them, Martinez picked up the classified files again, his eyes finding details he'd missed in the first reading. Erebus Squadron hadn't just been a unit, it had been an experiment, a test of how far the military could push its most capable pilots in situations where conventional tactics failed. The casualty reports made for grim reading, but the mission success rate told a different story entirely. The sound of jet engines reached crescendo outside his window as Thorne's A-10 taxied toward the runway. Martinez found himself offering a prayer he hadn't spoken since his own combat days, not for victory, but for the safe return of someone who'd already given more than anyone had a right to ask. The runway stretched before Reaper's A-10 like a path to judgment, its heat-shimmered surface reflecting the weight of decisions that had brought her to this moment. The Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, sat heavy on the tarmac, its ungainly appearance masking the lethal precision that had made it a legend among ground troops. Thorne ran through her pre-flight checklist with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed these rituals hundreds of times. Each switch engaged a familiar touchstone in the chaos of combat preparation. "Reaper, this is Casey in the tower," came the voice through her headset, tinged with the nervous energy of someone experiencing their first real taste of coordinated combat operations. "Weather update shows the storm front moving in faster than predicted. You've got maybe 20 minutes of clear flying before visibility drops to near zero." "Copy that, Casey," Thorne replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that had earned her the respect of Marines in foxholes across Afghanistan. "What's the tactical situation at FOB Marathon?" She adjusted her harness, the familiar weight of survival gear and sidearms settling into place like old friends returning home. 12 Marines from 2nd Platoon, Golf Company, surrounded in a valley approximately 30 clicks northeast of your position. Casey's voice crackled through static that spoke of distance and electronic warfare countermeasures. "Taliban forces estimated at company strength, dug in on the high ground. Marines have limited ammunition and no clear extraction route." Thorne's hands moved across the instrument panel with practiced efficiency, bringing the A-10 systems online. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the 7-barrel rotary cannon that gave the Warthog its distinctive sound and devastating firepower, showed green across all diagnostics. Maverick missiles hung from her wings like sleeping predators, while the aircraft's armor plating promised to bring her home through whatever hell waited in that valley. "Any friendly air assets in the area?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The storm front would ground most aircraft, leaving her alone in skis that belonged to weather and whatever surface-to-air threats the Taliban had managed to position. "Negative, Reaper. You're the only bird willing to fly in these conditions." Casey paused, and Thorne could hear the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. "The Marines, they specifically requested you, said they'd rather wait for Reaper than take their chances with anyone else." The compliment carried more weight than medals or commendations. In a world where reputation was built on successful missions and measured in lives saved, having Marines specifically request her call sign spoke to something deeper than skill. It spoke to trust earned in the crucible of combat, where the difference between precision and approximation was measured in American lives. "Tower, Reaper requesting immediate takeoff clearance," Thorne announced, her voice cutting through the radio chatter with the authority of someone who'd learned to command attention in crisis situations. The A-10's engines spooled up to full power, their distinctive whine building to a crescendo that made conversation impossible. "Reaper, you are cleared for immediate takeoff, runway 27, came the tower's response. "Good hunting, Captain." The Thunderbolt II accelerated down the runway with the purposeful momentum of inevitability, its heavy frame seeming to argue with the laws of physics before finally lifting into the Afghan sky. Below, the airbase shrank to a collection of geometric shapes against the endless brown of desert landscape, while ahead, storm clouds gathered like a wall of gray judgment. As Thorne climbed toward her operational altitude, she caught sight of her reflection in the cockpit glass, a woman whose eyes had seen too much, whose hands had delivered salvation and destruction with equal precision. The Cerberus tattoo hidden beneath her flight suit seemed to pulse with its own weight, a reminder of promises made in darker times to brothers and sisters who'd never made it home. "Casey, patch me through to FOB Marathon directly," she instructed, adjusting her flight path to intercept the coordinates where 12 Marines waited for salvation or death. "I want to talk to whoever's in charge down there." The radio crackled with interference as Casey worked to establish the connection, static mixing with the distant sound of automatic weapons fire. When the connection finally came through, the voice that emerged carried the hoarse exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for survival since before dawn. "This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, 1st Squad Leader. Please tell me you're bringing the cavalry, Reaper." Thorne smiled grimly, recognizing the tone of a non-commissioned officer who'd kept his men alive through pure determination and tactical skill. "Rodriguez, this is Captain Thorne. I'm inbound to your position with full ordnance load. What's your tactical situation?" "We're in a bowl-shaped valley with Taliban positions on 3 sides," Rodriguez replied, his voice punctuated by the crack of rifle fire. "They've got us zeroed in with mortars and at least 2 heavy machine gun positions. Every time we try to move, they light us up. We've got 2 wounded who need immediate evacuation." The tactical picture crystallized in Thorne's mind as she processed Rodriguez's report. A classic ambush situation. Marines caught in terrain that offered no easy escape, facing an enemy that held both numerical and positional advantage. The kind of situation that required not just firepower, but surgical precision to avoid hitting the very people she'd come to save. "Rodriguez, I need you to mark your position with smoke, green smoke if you have it. Also need locations on those heavy weapons positions." Thorne banked the A-10 toward the coordinates, her eyes already scanning the landscape ahead for the telltale signs of prepared defensive positions. "How's your ammunition situation?" "Running low on everything except determination, Reaper. Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left." Rodriguez's voice carried the grim humor that kept Marines sane in impossible situations. "But we've been here before. Just need someone to even the odds a little." Through her headset, Thorne could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47 fire mixing with the sharper crack of M4 carbines, a deadly conversation conducted in the universal language of combat. Storm clouds pressed closer, their gray mass promising to complicate an already dangerous mission. But somewhere in that valley, 12 Americans waited for her to prove once again why Marines asked for Reaper when the impossible became necessary. "Stand by, Rodriguez. The cavalry's about to arrive." The valley opened before Thorne like a tactical nightmare made manifest in stone and shadow. Through her targeting systems, she could see the scattered positions where Rodriguez's Marines had found whatever cover the terrain offered. Small clusters of movement behind rocks and in shallow depressions, each position marked by the muzzle flashes of weapons that spoke of disciplined fire control and dwindling ammunition. "Casey, I've got eyes on the objective," Thorne reported, her voice carrying the professional calm that masked the rapid calculations running through her mind. "Taliban positions are well concealed, dug in on the ridgelines with overlapping fields of fire. This is going to require precision work." "Copy, Reaper," Casey's voice crackled through increasing static as the storm front closed in. Weather update shows you've got maybe 15 minutes before conditions become unflyable. After that, you'll be grounded until the front passes. 15 minutes. In the compressed timeframe of combat, it might as well have been 15 seconds. Thorne adjusted her approach angle, bringing the A-10 in low and fast, using the valley's geography to mask her approach from the Taliban positions. The Warthog's distinctive silhouette, all angles and armor plating, had earned it a reputation that preceded its arrival on battlefields across the world. "Rodriguez, I see your green smoke," Thorne announced, spotting the emerald plume that marked the Marine's position like a beacon of hope in the chaos below. "I'm going to make my first pass from east to west, targeting the heavy weapons positions on the North Ridge. Keep your heads down and be ready to move when I give the word." "Roger, Reaper. We'll be ready." Rodriguez's voice carried the tight control of someone who understood that salvation often arrived wearing the sound of approaching aircraft engines. Thorne rolled the A-10 into its attack run, the aircraft systems automatically calculating range, wind speed, and target acquisition parameters. Through her heads-up display, the Taliban positions resolved into the geometric precision of military targeting, grid coordinates, and threat assessments that reduced human conflict to mathematical equations. But behind those equations, she knew, were Marines whose lives depended on her ability to thread the needle between precision and firepower. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up to firing speed, its 7 barrels rotating with mechanical hunger. At 3,900 rounds per minute, the weapon could deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision, if the pilot behind the trigger possessed the skill to wield it properly. Thorne's finger found the trigger as her targeting reticle settled over the first heavy weapons position. The sound that erupted from the A-10's nose was unlike anything else in modern warfare, a thunderous roar that seemed to tear the very air apart, punctuated by the distinctive BRRRT that had become the signature of close air support done right. Depleted uranium rounds tore into the Taliban position with devastating effect, silencing the heavy machine gun that had been keeping Rodriguez's Marines pinned in place. "Direct hit on target 1, Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying the first note of hope she'd heard since establishing contact. "That son of a bitch has been keeping us down all morning. Target 2 is approximately 50 meters west of the first position." Thorne banked hard, bringing the A-10 around for another pass while scanning for the second heavy weapons position. The Taliban fighters were learning to fear the sound of her approach, some of them breaking cover to seek better positions. The tactical situation was shifting, but time remained her enemy as much as the insurgents below. "Casey, I need immediate resupply authorization for a second bird," Thorne called over the radio, though she knew the weather would ground any potential support. "This is going to require multiple passes, and I'm going to be low on ammunition before we're done." "Negative on additional air support, Reaper. Weather's closing in fast, and you're already pushing the limits of safe flying conditions." Casey's voice carried the strain of someone watching a situation develop beyond his control. "You're going to have to make what you've got count." The second pass came in from a different angle, using the valley's terrain to approach the remaining Taliban positions from an unexpected direction. This time, Thorne selected Maverick missiles, their precision guidance systems locked onto heat signatures that spoke of prepared fighting positions and crew-served weapons. The missiles streaked away from her aircraft like mechanical angels of death, finding their targets with the accuracy that had made American air power legendary. Explosions bloomed across the North Ridge as the Mavericks impacted, their warheads designed to neutralize hardened positions and the people who occupied them. Secondary explosions suggested ammunition storage areas, each detonation reducing the Taliban's ability to sustain their ambush. But Thorne knew the enemy wouldn't simply retreat, they'd adapt, moving to secondary positions and trying to maintain their tactical advantage. "Rodriguez, you should have a clear corridor to the south now," Thorne announced, studying the tactical display that showed the Marines' position relative to the neutralized threats. I'm going to provide overwatch while you bound your wounded to the extraction point. Roger, Reaper, moving wounded now. Rodriguez's voice carried the urgency of someone seizing a tactical opportunity before it disappeared. We've got eyes on what looks like a mortar position on the West Ridge. Can you service that target? Thorne adjusted her flight path, bringing the A-10 around to engage the mortar position that threatened to rain indirect fire on the Marines as they moved toward safety. The storm clouds pressed closer, their gray mass beginning to obscure the ridgelines and complicate her targeting solutions. Weather was becoming as dangerous as the enemy fire. The third pass required all of her skill as the winds began to buffet the A-10 with increasing violence. Thorne fought the aircraft's controls, keeping her targeting steady despite turbulence that would have forced lesser pilots to abort their attack runs. The GAU-8 spoke again, its depleted uranium rounds finding the mortar position and silencing another threat to the Marines below. That's all 3 heavy weapons positions neutralized, Thorne reported, but her satisfaction was tempered by the reality of fuel consumption and ammunition expenditure. The A-10 was a tough aircraft, but even the Warthog had limits. Rodriguez, what's your status on the extraction? Moving to secondary position now, Reaper. 2 wounded are mobile with assistance. We should be at the extraction point in 10 minutes. Rodriguez's voice carried the controlled urgency of someone executing a plan under fire. Be advised, we're seeing movement on the South Ridge. Looks like they're trying to flank our route. The tactical situation continued to evolve as the Taliban fighters adapted to the loss of their heavy weapons. Thorne could see muzzle flashes from new positions, evidence that the enemy was attempting to re-establish their ambush from different angles. The Marines were running out of time, ammunition, and options. But then again, so was she. Casey, I need an immediate weather update, Thorne called, banking the A-10 to engage the new Taliban positions threatening the Marines' extraction route. How long before I'm completely grounded? Maybe 5 more minutes of flyable weather, Reaper. After that, visibility drops to 0 and winds exceed safe flying parameters. Casey's voice carried the weight of someone delivering news that could determine whether 12 Marines made it home alive. You need to think about extraction yourself. 5 minutes. Thorne's hands tightened on the aircraft's controls as she calculated ammunition remaining, fuel consumption, and the time required to neutralize the remaining threats. The mathematics of combat rarely offered perfect solutions, but sometimes they offered necessary ones. She adjusted her approach angle, bringing the A-10 in for what might be her final attack run before the weather made flying impossible. Rodriguez, I'm going to clear your extraction route, but after this pass, weather's going to ground me. You'll need to move fast and maintain tactical discipline. Thorne's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to make promises she could keep. Can your wounded handle a rapid movement to the landing zone? We'll make it work, Reaper. Just give us the window. Rodriguez's reply embodied the Marine Corps ethos that had carried them through impossible situations for over 2 centuries. When retreat wasn't an option and surrender wasn't acceptable, Marines found a third way forward. The final attack run came through whether that challenged every aspect of Thorne's flying ability. Wind shear threatened to slam the A-10 into the valley walls, while visibility dropped to levels that reduced navigation to instruments and instinct. But the targeting system still functioned, and the GAU-8 still carried enough ammunition for one more conversation, with the Taliban positions threatening Rodriguez's Marines. Thunder rolled across the valley, some from the approaching storm, some from the A-10's cannon as it delivered its final argument against the insurgent positions. Thorne pulled the aircraft up and away from the target area, fighting turbulence that seemed determined to claim both pilot and aircraft. But below, the Marines were moving, their extraction finally possible because someone had been willing to fly through conditions that grounded everyone else. "Rodriguez, I'm Winchester and bingo fuel," Thorne announced, using the military terminology that meant she was out of ammunition and dangerously low on fuel. "You're on your own from here, but you've got a clear path to the landing zone." "Copy, Reaper, and, thank you, you just saved 12 Marines today." Rodriguez's voice carried a weight that transcended military radio protocol, the gratitude of someone who understood the difference between a pilot who followed orders and one who made the impossible routine. As Thorne banked the A-10 toward home base, fighting weather that seemed intent on claiming her as payment for the morning's work, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the cockpit glass. The woman looking back had added another page to a legend that began with promises made in darker times. But more importantly, she'd kept faith with Marines who'd called for Reaper when all other options were exhausted. The landing approach through the storm tested every skill Thorne had accumulated through years of flying in conditions that kept other pilots grounded. The A-10 bucked and fought against wind shear that seemed determined to drive the aircraft into the ground, while rain lashed the cockpit glass with tropical fury. Visibility had dropped to near zero, reducing navigation to instrument readings, and the kind of intuitive flying that separated veterans from casualties. "Tower, this is Reaper requesting immediate landing clearance," Thorne called through radio static that spoke of lightning and electromagnetic interference. "I'm coming in hot with minimal fuel and deteriorating weather conditions." "Reaper, you are cleared for emergency landing, runway 27, came the tower's response, the controller's voice tight with the understanding that they were watching someone attempt what most pilots would consider impossible. "Emergency crews are standing by. Wind is gusting to 40 knots with severe crosswinds." The runway lights appeared through the storm like a constellation of hope, their precise geometry offering guidance through chaos that threatened to claim both pilot and aircraft. Thorne fought the A-10's controls, compensating for wind shear that tried to slam her into the ground while maintaining the precise approach angle that would bring her home alive. The Warthog's heavy frame worked in her favor, its mass providing stability that lighter aircraft couldn't match. Touchdown came hard, the aircraft's landing gear protesting against the impact as Thorne fought to maintain directional control on a runway slick with rain and crosswinds. The A-10 finally rolled to a stop, its engines winding down with the satisfied sound of machinery that had performed beyond its specifications. Around the aircraft, emergency crews moved with practiced efficiency, their presence a reminder of how close the margins had been. "Casey, this is Reaper," Thorne announced as she began her post-flight shutdown procedures. "I'm on deck and secure. What's the status on FOB Marathon extraction?" "Medical evacuation helicopter launched 15 minutes ago," Casey replied, his voice carrying relief that transcended professional distance. "Rodriguez and his Marines are en route to the field hospital. All 12 souls accounted for, 2 wounded but stable." He paused, and when he continued, his tone held something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I've never seen flying like that. The weather conditions were beyond anything I thought was possible." Thorne allowed herself a small smile as she secured the A-10 systems, each switch and control returning to safe configuration after a mission that had pushed both pilot and aircraft to their limits. "Casey, that wasn't flying. That was controlled falling with attitude." But beneath the humor, she felt the familiar weight of another mission completed, another group of Americans brought home because someone had been willing to venture into impossible weather. The debriefing room felt different when Thorne returned, its fluorescent lighting somehow less harsh, its institutional atmosphere softened by the knowledge that 12 Marines were alive because of decisions made in the space between lightning strikes. Colonel Martinez waited with files that seemed less important now, their classified markings reduced to administrative details in the face of immediate tactical success. "Captain Thorne, preliminary reports indicate complete mission success," Martinez began, but his formal tone carried undertones of something deeper, the recognition that he'd witnessed something that transcended standard military operations. FOB Marathon reports all personnel successfully extracted with no additional casualties. The Taliban positions, Thorne asked, settling into the chair that had seemed so uncomfortable during the morning's interrogation. Now it felt like a place where professionals discussed the technical aspects of applied violence in defense of American lives. Neutralized. Intelligence estimates enemy casualties at 15 to 20 fighters, with significant equipment losses including 3 heavy weapons positions and associated ammunition storage. Martinez consulted his notes, but his eyes kept returning to Thorne's face, studying someone who just demonstrated why certain call signs became legendary. The Marines specifically requested that I pass along their gratitude. Lieutenant Casey entered the room carrying fresh coffee and wearing an expression that spoke of someone who'd experienced a fundamental shift in understanding. His earlier nervousness had been replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who'd coordinated with excellence and lived to recognize it. "Captain, I wanted to thank you for letting me handle communications on that mission. I learned more about air support coordination in 3 hours than in 6 months of training." "Casey, you handled that radio traffic like a veteran," Thorne replied, accepting the coffee with genuine appreciation. "Clear communication saved lives today. Rodriguez and his Marines knew exactly what to expect because you made sure everyone was operating from the same tactical picture." The young lieutenant's expression showed the impact of recognition from someone whose approval carried weight beyond rank or position. In military culture, respect earned in combat carried more authority than any formal hierarchy, and Casey was beginning to understand the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application under fire. "Now," Martinez continued, his tone shifting back to the administrative matters that had been interrupted by crisis, "we still need to address the incident at Kandahar province, the unauthorized strike mission that brought you to my attention in the first place." Thorne set down her coffee, her expression returning to the neutral mask that had characterized the morning's interrogation. But something had changed in the dynamic between interrogator and subject. The successful rescue mission had provided context that transformed questions about unauthorized actions into discussions about tactical decision-making under extreme circumstances. "Colonel, before we continue with that discussion, I think you need to understand what Cerberus Squadron actually represented," Thorne said, her voice carrying the weight of someone preparing to share secrets that had been classified for reasons that went beyond normal operational security. Because the mission at Kandahar wasn't unauthorized, it was operating under authorities that don't appear in standard military doctrine. Martinez leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by the focused attention of someone who sensed they were about to learn something that would redefine their understanding of the war they'd been fighting. "What kind of authorities, Captain?" "The kind that get activated when American lives are at stake and conventional command structures are too slow to prevent casualties," Thorne replied, her gray eyes holding depths that spoke of decisions made in gray areas where right and wrong became matters of immediate survival rather than abstract principle. "Cerberus Squadron wasn't just a unit, sir. It was a commitment." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the base, rain hammering against windows with the persistence of nature asserting dominance over human ambition. But inside the debriefing room, 3 military professionals grappled with questions that existed in the spaces between official doctrine and operational necessity, the gray areas where wars were actually won or lost. The classified folder Martinez opened next contained photographs that made even experienced military officers pause. Satellite imagery showed the Kandahar compound before and after Thorne's strike, a transformation from organized military structure to smoking crater that spoke of precision firepower applied with surgical accuracy. But more disturbing were the intelligence photographs that showed what had been happening inside those buildings before their destruction. "Captain, these images were taken by a reconnaissance drone 12 hours before your strike," Martinez said, sliding the first photograph across the table. They show 3 American soldiers in Taliban custody, confirmed as members of the convoy that was ambushed 2 weeks prior. Thorne studied the images with professional detachment, though Casey could see her jaw tight as she processed details that spoke of American prisoners in enemy hands. The photographs showed men in U.S. military uniforms under obvious duress, their body language speaking of interrogation techniques that violated every international convention on the treatment of prisoners of war. The timeline shows that official rescue authorization was delayed pending diplomatic negotiations with Pakistani authorities. Martinez continued, consulting classified communications that revealed the bureaucratic machinery that sometimes impeded rapid military response. Estimated time for approved rescue mission was 72 hours minimum. 72 hours, Thorne repeated, her voice carrying the flat tone of someone who understood tactical realities that desk officers rarely confronted. Colonel, have you ever been captured? Spent time in enemy custody wondering if your country remembers you exist? Martinez shook his head, recognizing that Thorne's question carried implications beyond theoretical discussion. No, Captain, I haven't. Then let me explain something about time, Thorne said, her voice gaining intensity as she leaned forward across the table. 72 hours in enemy custody isn't 72 hours of waiting for rescue. It's 72 hours of interrogation, torture, and psychological pressure designed to break American soldiers and extract intelligence that gets other Americans killed. She pointed to details in the photographs that spoke of professional military analysis applied to human suffering. Look at the body language in these images. These men were already showing signs of physical abuse. In 72 hours, they would have been broken or dead, and the intelligence they carried about convoy routes, base security, and operational procedures would have been in Taliban hands. Casey studied the images with the horrified fascination of someone confronting the human cost of military operations for the first time. His training had prepared him for theoretical discussions of prisoner rescue, but the reality of American soldiers in enemy custody transformed abstract procedures into moral imperatives that demanded immediate action. The Cerberus squadron authorization, Martinez prompted, sensing that Thorne was building towards something that would explain not just the Kandahar strike, but the larger context that made such operations necessary. Cerberus squadron operated under what we called discretionary engagement parameters, Thorne explained, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone discussing classified operations. When American lives were at immediate risk and conventional command structures were too slow to respond effectively, selected pilots were authorized to take independent action based on tactical judgment and available intelligence.